Racist banker kicks black elderly woman out of the bank. When he discovers her true identity, he starts trembling immediately. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment below to tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into another emotional story that's sure to touch your heart. Michael Reynolds was the embodiment of ambition. Always impeccable in his tailored suit, perfectly styled hair, and a gleaming Rolex that seemed to outshine the crystal chandeliers of the branch, he made it a point to project an image of unwavering success. The First Capital Bank in New York wasn't just a financial institution, it was a symbol of status, and Michael was its gatekeeper. For him, being a manager wasn't enough, he had to be the best. His superiors considered him efficient, but to his subordinates, he was cold and ruthless. That Tuesday morning, the branch was bustling as usual. Clients in expensive suits and designer handbags filled the lobby, discussing investments and corporate accounts. The tellers, trained to maintain the same level of formality and efficiency, served them with practiced smiles, all while under Michael's constant supervision. He hovered over the room like a shadow, watching for any mistake. When the bank's automatic doors slid open, an unexpected figure crossed the threshold. Eleanor Brooks entered with steady, deliberate steps. Her gray hair, pulled into a simple bun, contrasted with her ebony skin. Dressed in a floral blouse with soft hues and a long skirt that gave her a serene appearance, she carried a worn fabric bag and a small envelope in her hands. Despite their warmth, Eleanor's eyes conveyed a quiet determination. As soon as Eleanor stepped in, Michael noticed her. He was standing at the main counter, reviewing important documents for a meeting with a major investor, but her presence made him frown. He immediately judged her appearance. In his mind, she was just another person who had wandered into the wrong place. "Linda," he discreetly called one of the tellers, "find out what that woman wants. If it's something simple, ask her to come back another time. We're not here to deal with small account issues today." Linda, a timid young woman who was always obedient to her boss, nodded. She walked over to Eleanor, who was patiently waiting in line. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" Linda asked with a rehearsed smile. "Good morning, dear," Eleanor replied in a calm, melodic voice. "I need to resolve an issue with my account. It seems there was an unauthorized withdrawal, and the money was meant for this month's rent. I'm a bit worried." Linda hesitated. It wasn't uncommon for Michael to dismiss or belittle requests from low-income clients. She knew it would be hard to advocate for the elderly woman. "I understand. Do you have your account number or any documents with you?" Linda asked, trying to buy time. "Yes, I brought everything with me," Eleanor said, showing the envelope filled with neatly organized papers. At that moment, Michael approached them. His expression was stern and his tone sharp. "Is there a problem, Linda?" he asked, looking directly at Eleanor. "No, sir. Ms. Eleanor Brooks needs assistance with an issue in her account," Linda replied, visibly uncomfortable. Michael gave Eleanor a scrutinizing look, taking in every detail of her outfit, her worn bag, and the weathered envelope she held. He took a deep breath, as if already predicting how this encounter would end. "Ms. Brooks, correct?" he began, his tone polite but distant. "We need to prioritize our corporate and high-value clients today. It might be better if you returned at a less busy time." Eleanor met his gaze for a moment, maintaining her composure. She didn't appear intimidated, which caught Michael off guard. "I understand your concern, young man. But this issue with my account is urgent. The money that's missing was meant for my rent, and I can't afford to wait," she said firmly. Her straightforward response irritated Michael, who hated being contradicted. He forced a smile. "I understand, but our staff is overwhelmed today. Maybe tomorrow." Before he could finish, Eleanor opened the envelope and pulled out a bank statement, clearly showing the discrepancy in her balance. The simplicity of her action momentarily disarmed Michael's arrogant demeanor. She looked him straight in the eye, unwavering. "Young man, I didn't come here to be sent away. I've been a client of this bank for many years. My money may not seem significant to you, but it's vital for my survival. So, I'm simply asking for someone to address this seriously." Michael felt a wave of heat rise to his neck. The elderly woman's sincerity and the calmness in her voice were unsettling. For a manager who prioritized large sums and million-dollar transactions, it was difficult to view Eleanor's problem as important. Yet something in her tone made him hesitate. "All right, let me see what I can do," he finally said, though he couldn't hide his impatience. He took the statement from Eleanor's hand and walked back to his desk. The elderly woman sat down in one of the waiting area chairs, keeping her posture upright. Meanwhile, Michael began checking the bank system. In his mind, he was still questioning why he was wasting time on this. But to his surprise, there really was an error in Eleanor's account. A transaction that made no sense had been registered. He returned to the counter, now with a more serious expression. "It seems there was an error with the transfer, Ms. Brooks. I'll need to verify this with our technical department, but I can assure you the issue will be resolved." "Thank you, young man," she replied with a small smile. "I'm not here to cause trouble, just to resolve my own." Michael remained silent for a moment. The ease with which she expressed her gratitude, even after being treated with disdain, unsettled him. He couldn't quite explain it, but something about Eleanor made him momentarily question his worldview. As she waited, some clients watched the scene with curiosity. Some seemed intrigued, others felt pity for the elderly woman sitting patiently. Yet, Eleanor appeared unbothered by the stares. Her composure was unshakable, almost defiant. For Michael, this encounter was just another incident in his day. But he had no idea that Eleanor Brooks was far from an ordinary client. This was only the beginning of a story that would change his life forever. Eleanor remained seated in the waiting area, observing the room around her. Though the curious and occasionally judgmental glances were evident, she maintained her serene demeanor, as if oblivious to any discomfort. With her bag resting on her lap and her hands clasped together, she was the picture of patience. However, behind her apparent calm, Eleanor felt the tension of being watched. Michael, across the room, continued reviewing documents at his desk. He had already requested the technical department to analyze the suspicious transaction in Eleanor's account, yet her presence continued to bother him. In his elitist view, this space was meant for important people, clients with significant transactions and accounts that contributed to the bank's prestige. Eleanor, with her simplicity, was an unsettling contrast to the usual clientele. After a few minutes, Michael abruptly stood up and strode across the room with firm steps. His expression radiated impatience, and the atmosphere seemed to chill as he approached Eleanor. Reaching her side, he made no effort to be discreet. "Ms. Brooks," he called out, his sharp tone cutting through the air. Eleanor looked up calmly, meeting Michael's icy gaze. "We're already handling your case. However, this isn't the place for you to wait." Eleanor blinked, surprised but composed. "I'm waiting where I was told to wait, young man. I'm quite sure I'm in the right place," she replied, her tranquility seemingly irritating Michael even more. He crossed his arms, ignoring the murmurs of a few clients who had already noticed the interaction. "I don't mean to be rude, but this bank cannot afford to waste time on situations like yours. We have rules to maintain order and efficiency. We don't want our space to be mistaken for a social assistance agency. You understand?" he said with a forced smile, dripping with disdain. The room fell silent. His words hung in the air like an accusation. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, clearly offended but still in control. "Young man, I believe I am here as a customer. I didn't come to ask for anything beyond correcting an error in my account." "I'm confused by the tone you're using with me," she responded, firm but polite. Michael leaned slightly toward her, completely disregarding her attempt to de-escalate the situation. "Ma'am, let's be honest. People like you..." He paused, letting the contempt seep into his voice. "Don't usually frequent places like this. Since you walked into this branch, our clients have been questioning the credibility of this establishment. Frankly, I'm trying to be understanding, but you're causing a disruption." Eleanor blinked, processing his comment. The murmurs in the room grew louder, and some clients exchanged uncomfortable glances. Despite this, no one dared to intervene. Everyone knew Michael and his relentless behavior. "Young man, are you suggesting that I don't belong here?" she asked, her tone still calm but with a hint of indignation. Michael shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "Exactly, ma'am. I don't know why you came here, but this isn't the right place for you." Eleanor stood up, placing her bag over her shoulder. Though shorter than Michael, her posture made it seem as though they were on the same level. "I have something to teach you, young man," she began, looking him directly in the eyes. "Never underestimate someone based on their appearance. I'm here as a client, and I expected to be treated as one. It's a shame this bank entrusts its leadership to someone who doesn't know how to respect others." Michael let out a dry laugh, visibly irritated by her response. Without thinking, he took a step closer, raising his voice so everyone in the room could hear. "Well, look at that. We have a moral teacher here. You know, I've wasted enough time on this. Mr. Anderson," he called out, addressing the security guard stationed at the bank's entrance. The guard, a burly man who looked visibly uncomfortable with the situation, hesitantly approached. "Please escort Ms. Brooks to the exit." "This isn't the place for her," Michael ordered, ignoring the embarrassment he was causing. "Wait a moment, young man," Eleanor protested, raising her voice for the first time. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm a client just like anyone else here. You have no right to treat me this way." Michael silenced her with a dismissive gesture, as though silencing her was the most natural thing in the world. "Ma'am, I'm not going to argue. I won't allow you to turn my branch into chaos. What exactly are you trying to do here? This seems very suspicious. Who knows, maybe you're attempting something you shouldn't?" He smiled sarcastically and delivered the final blow. "Frankly, I think you're out of your mind. Crazy, perhaps. Please, go find somewhere that accepts people like you." The impact of his words was immediate. The room fell completely silent. All the clients and employees stood frozen, shocked by Michael's behavior. Eleanor's eyes glistened briefly with restrained tears, but she quickly lifted her chin and took a deep breath. "People like me?" she repeated, her voice now deeper, yet controlled. "You should be ashamed of yourself for saying something like that." Michael, however, seemed unfazed. He gestured again to the security guard, who now hesitated to approach Eleanor. "I said to remove this woman from the branch," Michael shouted, causing everyone in the room to take a step back. His tone of authority was unquestionable. Eleanor looked at the security guard, who appeared torn between following orders and respecting the elderly woman. Without waiting for further humiliation, she stepped forward. "Don't worry, Mr. Security Guard. I'll leave on my own," she said with dignity. And before stepping through the door, she turned to Michael one last time. "Young man, remember this. Life always finds a way to teach lessons that words cannot convey. My account may be small, but the respect you'll one day need from others will be even smaller." With those words, Eleanor left the branch. The silence lingered in the room long after she exited. Even the clients who would typically side with Michael seemed unable to justify his behavior. Michael, however, appeared satisfied as he returned to his desk, acting as though nothing had happened. He had no idea that this moment was only the beginning of a series of events that would shake the foundations of his life and career. Eleanor left the bank with her dignity intact, though the marks of the episode were evident on her face. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her bag tightly against her chest, as if the simple gesture could push away the weight of Michael's words. Despite the storm of emotions, she walked with steady steps, her head held high. She would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her defeated. Outside, Sarah Thompson, still stunned by what she had witnessed, decided to act. She was in the parking lot, about to get into her car, when she saw Eleanor being escorted out by the security guard. Outraged, she decided to record the final moments of the scene. With her phone in hand, Sarah captured the moment Eleanor left the branch and caught Michael's final words echoing through the glass doors. "This isn't a social service agency. Go find somewhere that accepts people like you," the manager declared, a cynical smile on his face. Sarah stopped recording, her heart pounding. This is wrong on so many levels, she thought, feeling her anger rising. Even though she didn't know Eleanor, Sarah knew this couldn't be ignored. She hesitated for a moment, staring at the video. It was hard to decide whether to share something so sensitive, but as she rewatched the footage, her indignation won out. She quickly added a caption to the video before posting it on her social media. "Today, I witnessed something revolting at First Capital Bank. A customer was humiliated and discriminated against by the manager, who clearly judged her by her appearance and the color of her skin. This cannot be normalized." Share. Sarah didn't have many followers, but she knew the power of social media could turn any story into something bigger. She used some relevant hashtags, like #EndRacism and #JusticeForEleanor, and posted the video. Within minutes, the first comments and shares started appearing. "Unbelievable! How do people like this still exist? That woman deserves respect, not humiliation. Where did this happen? We need to expose it." The video began circulating in small groups and local pages, catching the attention of people familiar with the branch or who had similar stories to tell. It wasn't viral yet, but the outrage was gaining momentum with every like and comment. While the video started to pick up traction online, Eleanor tried to return to her routine. Once she got home, she sat in her favorite armchair, taking deep breaths and processing what had happened. She had faced humiliation before, but something about that day felt different. Perhaps it was the fact that, for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel just like a victim. She felt like a representative of a larger fight. Across town, Sarah kept a close eye on her post's performance. The number of shares was steadily climbing, and direct messages began flooding her inbox. One follower asked for the details of the bank, another mentioned a local anti-racism activist group. Sarah responded as best as she could, feeling the story had the potential to grow, though she still didn't know the full extent of its impact. Meanwhile, at the First Capital Bank branch, everything seemed to continue as usual. Michael, entirely oblivious to what was happening outside, returned to his desk, satisfied that he had restored order. He had no idea that Sarah had recorded the scene and that his seemingly insignificant actions were starting to create a ripple effect. The employees, on the other hand, could feel the tension in the air. Many had witnessed the incident, but none dared to confront Michael. He was known for his difficult temperament and the strict control he exercised over the team. Most preferred to keep their heads down, avoiding unnecessary conflicts. However, there were whispers. A teller quietly commented to a colleague while organizing papers at the counter. That was wrong. No matter who she was, she shouldn't have been treated like that. Keep your voice down. If Michael hears, you could be next, the colleague replied, glancing nervously toward the manager's office. Though no one openly took a stand, the tension was palpable. Michael, however, seemed oblivious to the uncomfortable atmosphere he had created. That night, while Eleanor tried to rest, unaware that her story was beginning to spread, Sarah received a notification on her phone. A small local news page had reposted the video with the caption, "An elderly customer is humiliated at a First Capital Bank branch in New York. Watch the video and draw your own conclusions." The number of views began climbing rapidly, as did the comments. Some people started tagging larger pages and influencers, urging them to share the story. The outrage was growing, still subtle but steady. If this happened to her, how many others have gone through the same thing? That manager needs to be held accountable. I hope Ms. Eleanor is okay. This cannot go unpunished. Sarah felt a mix of satisfaction and anxiety as she watched her post gain traction. It wasn't a sudden viral moment, but a wave that was steadily building. She knew it was only a matter of time before it reached the bank and Michael. For now, everything inside the branch remained calm. But outside, on social media, the storm was brewing. It was only a matter of time before the real impact of Eleanor Brooks's humiliation would be felt. The morning after the incident marked the beginning of a subtle yet powerful shift. As Michael began another day at the First Capital Bank branch, blissfully ignorant of the consequences of his actions, the world around him was starting to learn about Eleanor Brooks and what had really happened. The video Sarah had recorded, though still far from viral, continued to circulate. Amid the comments of indignation and solidarity, a message caught Sarah's attention. It came from a low-profile account, but the tone was urgent. Do you know who Eleanor Brooks is? I think there's more to this story than meets the eye. Look up her name. Intrigued, Sarah began researching. What she found left her completely stunned. Eleanor Brooks wasn't just any customer. In fact, she was a highly respected figure in the financial world. Though she had never sought the spotlight, her name was well regarded among top executives. As a retired CEO and the majority shareholder of the financial group that owned First Capital Bank, Eleanor had dedicated her life to building an institution based on values of inclusion, respect, and excellence in customer service. After decades at the helm, she chose to step away from corporate life but continued to closely monitor the bank's operations. Eleanor believed that a company's true success wasn't just in profits but in how it treated people, especially the most vulnerable. To ensure these values were upheld, she conducted surprise audits, visiting branches discreetly to evaluate customer service. Her visit to Michael's branch was part of one of these audits. Now aware of Eleanor's true identity, Sarah updated her post's caption. Update: I've discovered that Eleanor Brooks isn't just a customer. She's the retired CEO and majority shareholder of the group that owns First Capital Bank. She was visiting the branch as part of a surprise audit. The person Michael humiliated is, in fact, the one who holds power over the bank. This story is far from over. As soon as this new information was shared, interest in the story grew exponentially. The video began circulating in wider circles, reaching influencers and local news pages. The outrage that had been simmering transformed into a call for justice. Meanwhile, Eleanor still had no idea her identity had been revealed to the public. She spent her morning at home, busy organizing documents related to her audit. But around noon, a call from her longtime assistant, Margaret, changed everything. Eleanor, you need to see something right now, Margaret said, her voice unusually urgent. What's going on? Eleanor asked, surprised. It's all over social media. Someone recorded yesterday's incident, and your identity has been revealed. The video is starting to gain traction. You need to see this. Eleanor opened her laptop and, with Margaret's help, found Sarah's post. She watched the video in silence, taking in the uncomfortable scene of her exit from the branch and Michael's cruel comments. Then she read the updated caption, which revealed her true position within the financial group. Well, this wasn't exactly what I had planned, Eleanor remarked with a sigh. What do we do now? Margaret asked. This is going to hit the bank hard, and Michael is definitely going to be fired. Eleanor remained silent for a moment, weighing her options. She knew her position gave her the power to act decisively, but she also understood that any action needed to be strategic. This incident wasn't just about Michael, it was an opportunity to address deeper issues within the company's culture. First, I'll contact the board. I want them to know I'm aware of what happened and that I'll be taking action, Eleanor said firmly. Then, I want a meeting with the branch leadership. Michael will have to face the consequences, but I want this handled in a way that teaches everyone involved something meaningful. As Eleanor began to take control of the situation, the impact of her true identity continued to spread. Small news outlets were already publishing articles about the case, highlighting the irony of a retired CEO, responsible for one of the country's largest financial groups, being humiliated at her own institution. Michael, however, remained completely unaware. At the branch, he was busy reviewing reports and strategizing ways to attract high-profile clients. The branch staff, on the other hand, had started hearing rumors about Eleanor. One teller, who had seen the video shared by a friend, whispered to a colleague, "Did you see who she is? Eleanor Brooks. The woman he humiliated owns all of this." "You're joking, right?" the colleague replied, shocked. Early that afternoon, the story reached a new level. A renowned activist with millions of followers on social media shared the video along with a powerful statement. Racism and discrimination must be fought in every space, especially in financial institutions that are supposed to serve everyone. Eleanor Brooks, we stand with you. #Justice for Eleanor. The post was enough to make the case a trending topic on social media. Celebrities began to speak out, demanding answers from First Capital Bank. Among the posts were calls for the bank to issue a public apology and take action against Michael. From her home, Eleanor watched the developments closely. Although she hadn't planned for this level of attention, she knew the situation could be used as an opportunity to drive meaningful change within the bank and perhaps inspire other companies to rethink their practices. "Margaret, contact the board," Eleanor requested. "I want a meeting with them today. It's time to devise a strategy to address this transparently and effectively." Margaret, ever efficient, began organizing the details. Eleanor knew she needed to balance her public stance with her position within the bank. She didn't want the situation to be seen as mere retaliation against Michael, but rather as a wake-up call for the company's entire organizational culture. "This isn't just about him, Margaret," she reflected. "This incident has exposed something much bigger. We need to fix it at the root." As Eleanor prepared for her meeting with the board, Michael was finally starting to sense that something was wrong. During a call with a colleague from another branch, he was confronted directly. "Man, what did you do yesterday? Your name is all over social media. Looks like you had some issue with a customer." "Eleanor Brooks, is that right?" Michael frowned, irritated. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I just handled the situation the way I always do." "Who even is Eleanor Brooks?" "You might want to look her up before you answer," the colleague suggested before ending the call. Still skeptical, Michael opened the browser on his desk computer and typed Eleanor Brooks. The first page of results sent a chill down his spine. His face paled as he realized he was at the center of something far bigger than he had imagined. The control he thought he had over the branch was unraveling, and Michael was beginning to see that his arrogance might be his downfall. The next morning began like any other for Michael Reynolds. Dressed in his most expensive suit and a meticulously chosen tie to impress, he felt confident. The email he had received the night before, notifying him of a meeting with senior executives, had sparked a sense of importance in him. Michael, convinced that his performance as a manager was being recognized, saw the meeting as an opportunity to showcase his efficiency and strategic vision. Upon arriving at the branch, he immediately set his team into motion. He instructed everyone to ensure the reports were in order, the environment was spotless, and the tellers greeted clients with maximum professionalism. He even prepared a presentation, complete with detailed graphs about the branch's growth, client acquisition campaigns, and service statistics. "Today is an important day for us," he told the team in his usual superior tone. "I want everyone at their best. The board is here to evaluate our work, and we can't afford to disappoint them." As he issued orders, the staff remained silent, exchanging nervous glances. The buzz about Eleanor Brooks and the video circulating online had intensified, but no one dared to mention anything to Michael. The manager was so convinced that the meeting was to praise him that there was no room for doubt in his mind. Around 10 a.m., 3 black cars pulled up in front of the branch. From the first vehicle, 2 men and a woman stepped out, all dressed formally. They were senior executives from First Capital Bank, sent to oversee the meeting in person. Michael greeted them at the door with a confident smile and a firm handshake. "Welcome to our branch. It's an honor to have the board here. Please, follow me to the conference room," he said, leading them through the main floor, where employees worked in silence. As they entered, Michael failed to notice a 4th car parked just behind the others. Inside was Eleanor Brooks, accompanied by Margaret and 2 other members of the bank's board. Eleanor stepped out calmly, dressed simply as always. Her composed demeanor contrasted sharply with Michael's bustling self-importance. In the conference room, Michael began his presentation with enthusiasm. He displayed graphs on the projector and elaborated on the branch's impressive metrics. He made a point of highlighting his own leadership as the driving force behind the positive results. "As you can see, our strategy of focusing on high-profile clients has been paying off. We're reducing costs and maximizing profits while maintaining the exclusivity that First Capital Bank represents," he said with a satisfied smile. The board members listened silently, exchanging subtle glances but refraining from interrupting. Michael took this as a sign of approval and continued speaking for nearly 20 minutes. convinced he was leaving them impressed. Suddenly, the conference room door opened. All eyes turned to Eleanor Brooks, who entered with measured steps, accompanied by the other board members. The impact was immediate. Michael froze completely, his mouth slightly open, unable to form a single word. To him, the humble, unassuming woman he had humiliated the day before bore no resemblance to the authoritative figure now standing before him. "Good morning, gentlemen," Eleanor said, her voice calm but commanding. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Oh, if I were Michael, I'd already be packing my things." The atmosphere in the branch began to shift, with employees exchanging worried glances as they continued their work. By late afternoon, an official email arrived at Michael's desk. It was from the corporate office of the financial group, requesting an urgent meeting the next morning with Eleanor Brooks in attendance. As he opened the message, Michael frowned, still unaware of the gravity of the situation. "Who is this Eleanor Brooks?" he asked Linda, one of the tellers, in his usual arrogant tone. Linda hesitated for a moment before responding, barely hiding a small smirk. "I guess you'll find out tomorrow," she replied, turning her attention back to the papers in front of her. Michael was intrigued but didn't give it much thought. To him, Eleanor was nothing more than a problematic client who should already be out of his life. Little did he know that his despicable attitude was about to change not only his career but also public perception of First Capital Bank. Meanwhile, Eleanor, with her characteristic calm, was preparing for what was to come. She knew she had the power to turn this humiliation into an opportunity to expose deeper issues and reaffirm the values she believed were essential for a company's success. Michael Reynolds began his day at the branch with his usual confidence. Dressed in a spotless suit, he walked between the teller desks like a general inspecting his troops. To him, the incident with Eleanor Brooks the previous day was already an insignificant event, filed away in his mind as just another show of authority. In Michael's view, he had reaffirmed his control over the branch and demonstrated that he wouldn't tolerate disruptions to his routine. "Linda, I need you to send these reports before noon. No delays today," he ordered the teller without even looking at her. Linda, like many of the other employees, knew something was happening outside the walls of the branch. Rumors about the video recorded by Sarah were spreading among the staff, but no one dared to mention it directly to Michael. He, on the other hand, remained completely oblivious to the storm brewing. As Michael occupied himself with meetings and reports, social media was buzzing. The hashtag Justice for Eleanor began to gain momentum, fueled by the collective outrage of thousands of people. The video shared by Sarah had surpassed 10,000 views, and public figures were starting to get involved. A journalist from a local news outlet was one of the first to notice the story and share it with her followers. What happens when a bank manager publicly humiliates a customer without knowing who she really is? Eleanor Brooks deserves respect, not disdain. We're following this case. #Justice for Eleanor. The post quickly gained traction, shared by other journalists and smaller influencers. The reach of the video grew even further, and comments flooded social media. "That manager needs to be fired immediately. How can someone with such prejudice represent a financial institution? Eleanor Brooks is the epitome of dignity. I hope she shows him who's in charge." As the video spread, journalists began reaching out to Eleanor directly. Some contacted her assistant, Margaret, while others tried emailing her. Still processing the unfolding events, Eleanor asked Margaret to handle the responses for the time being. "I don't want to turn this into a spectacle," Eleanor said calmly. "Let's wait and see how far this goes." At First Capital Bank's corporate offices, the story's impact was starting to be felt. The public relations department had been caught off guard by the growth of the #Justice for Eleanor hashtag and the attention the case was receiving. "We've got a serious problem here," said James Carter, the head of communications, during an emergency meeting. "The video is spreading, and people are beginning to associate our brand with discrimination and racism. We need a response plan." "And what about Ms. Brooks?" one of the directors asked. "Has she made any official statement?" "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. We need to get ahead of this." The manager involved, Michael Reynolds, should be immediately suspended while we investigate the matter, James suggested. The board agreed to act swiftly. A preliminary statement was drafted, promising to investigate the incident and take appropriate action. However, internally, everyone knew the situation was delicate. Eleanor Brooks wasn't just any client, she was the majority shareholder of the company. Any response that failed to satisfy her could lead to far more severe consequences. As the bank scrambled to manage the crisis, Michael remained entirely unaware. He had spent the morning reviewing reports and planning a campaign to attract new corporate clients. His confidence remained unshaken, and he had no inkling that he had become the center of attention outside the branch. During lunch, Linda and other employees gathered discreetly in the branch break room to discuss what was happening. "Did you see the hashtag? It's everywhere now," one teller said, showing their phone. "It's getting serious." "Even journalists are talking about it," Linda replied, concerned. "What do you think will happen to Michael? He has no idea. But when he finds out, it'll be too late." Despite the murmurs among the staff, no one dared confront Michael directly. They were simply waiting, knowing that something was about to explode. The board members stood up, greeting her respectfully. Some murmured "Ms. Brooks" as they shook her hand, reinforcing her position as the majority shareholder and the most influential figure in the financial group. Michael, still in disbelief, tried to regain his composure. "Ms. Brooks, I didn't know that you—" he began, but his voice faltered. Eleanor interrupted him with a firm yet non-hostile look. "It seems we have much to discuss today, Mr. Reynolds. Please, continue your presentation. I'm curious to hear more about your customer service strategy," she said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Michael swallowed hard. His confidence crumbled entirely, and he could barely remember what was on his slides. He tried to continue, but his voice shook, and his explanations became muddled and full of pauses. He knew he was facing an inevitable disaster. When Michael finally finished his presentation, Eleanor leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with him. "Mr. Reynolds, your presentation was interesting. But let me ask you a simple question. How do you define the concept of company values?" she asked, her tone polite yet carrying undeniable weight. Michael hesitated, feeling the gaze of everyone in the room, especially Eleanor, whose piercing look seemed to cut through him. "Well, the company's values are efficiency, excellence, and meeting the needs of priority clients," he answered, attempting to sound confident. Eleanor nodded slowly, but her expression revealed no approval. "And who do you consider priority clients?" she continued. Michael squirmed in his chair, fully aware that any answer could make his situation worse. "All clients who significantly contribute to the bank's financial performance," he replied cautiously. Eleanor paused, letting the silence hang in the room before responding. "Interesting. Because, if I recall correctly, the values of First Capital Bank include inclusion, respect, and accessibility. I don't see any mention of financial contribution as a criterion for determining a client's importance." "Perhaps you've misinterpreted our mission," she said incisively. Michael opened his mouth to respond but found himself unable to say anything. He felt exposed and vulnerable, an unfamiliar and deeply uncomfortable sensation. Eleanor then stood, calmly adjusting her posture. "Mr. Reynolds, before we proceed with this meeting, I'd like to remind you of something. As the majority shareholder and founder of this financial group, I've always made it clear that our values are not just pretty words for annual reports. They are principles by which we must conduct ourselves every day. I believe the incident yesterday, which is now being widely discussed outside this room, is a clear example of those values being disregarded here. This is unacceptable," she said with a firmness that made the air in the room feel heavier. The room fell into absolute silence. Michael, feeling the weight of her words, realized his position was hanging by a thread. He had always believed he was in control, but now the truth stared him in the face, and he knew his arrogance had been his downfall. Still standing, Eleanor turned her gaze to the other board members. "Let's discuss the next steps. I'm confident we can learn something valuable from this. After all, every crisis is an opportunity for growth," she said before sitting back down, making it clear that the meeting was far from over. The First Capital Bank conference room was shrouded in tense silence, as though the air was heavy with anticipation. Eleanor Brooks, seated at the head of the table, adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Michael Reynolds. Her posture radiated authority, but it was her composed demeanor that intimidated far more than any raised voice ever could. "Mr. Reynolds," she began firmly, "I believe everyone here already has an idea of why we're gathered. However, let me clarify. Yesterday, I visited this branch for a surprise audit, something I routinely do to ensure the bank's values are being upheld. Unfortunately, what I witnessed was the exact opposite." Michael attempted to interject, but Eleanor raised a hand, cutting him off with elegance. "I'm not finished yet. As part of the audit, I aim to evaluate not just the numbers but also the customer experience. The way I was treated at this branch is something I never imagined witnessing in an institution I built on principles of inclusion, respect, and excellence. What I experienced was public humiliation and discrimination." Eleanor paused, opening a laptop Margaret had brought. With a click, she projected Sarah's video onto the screen. The footage began to play, showing every moment of Michael's interaction with Eleanor the previous day. The room remained silent as Michael's cruel words echoed from the recording. "This isn't a social service agency. Go find somewhere that accepts people like you." The impact was immediate. The board members exchanged looks of shock. Some shook their heads in disapproval, while others simply stared at Michael with expressions ranging from surprise to condemnation. "This video was recorded by a customer present at the branch," Eleanor continued, pausing the video at the moment the security guard escorted her out. "Since then, it has been circulating on social media. As a result, the bank's reputation is being called into question, and people are asking whether we truly value all our clients. This isn't just a PR crisis, Mr. Reynolds. It's a reflection of your leadership." Michael, who had remained silent up to this point, began to shift uncomfortably in his chair. He knew he had to speak, but his mind was in turmoil. "Ms. Brooks, that's not exactly how it happened. This video doesn't show the full context. You came in unannounced, and our protocols, well, we had many important clients at the time, and..." He stumbled over his words, desperately trying to find a plausible justification. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, clearly dissatisfied. "Protocols?" she questioned coldly. "What protocols authorize the humiliation of a customer? What protocols justify insinuating that someone doesn't belong because of their appearance or social status? I'm curious to hear your explanation." Michael began to sweat, his expression shifting from confident to desperate. He felt the weight of every gaze in the room, and the pressure grew with each passing second. Unable to form a coherent defense, he tried to shift the narrative. "Well, maybe the problem was caused by gaps in staff training. Yes, the tellers might not have followed procedures correctly, and the security guards should have handled the situation differently. I trusted they were trained to deal with incidents like this," he said, subtly deflecting blame onto Linda and the other staff present. Eleanor took a deep breath, containing her irritation. She stood and slowly walked around the table, arms crossed. "So, you're suggesting that the tellers and security staff are responsible for what happened?" she asked, stopping behind Michael. "Because, if I recall correctly, it was your voice I heard in that video. It was you who called me crazy and insinuated I was trying something suspicious. It was you who ordered the security guards to escort me out, as if I had no right to be here. Am I mistaken?" Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. His mind raced for an escape, but each word from Eleanor cornered him further. "Ms. Brooks, I may have misspoken, but it was never my intention to offend anyone. Maybe I was too firm, but that's part of my role as a manager. I need to ensure order is maintained in the branch and..." Eleanor interrupted him, returning to her seat. "Maintain order?" she repeated, her tone filled with disbelief. "What you ensured yesterday was the violation of every principle this company stands for. Not only did you disrespect a customer, but you jeopardized the bank's reputation. And, frankly, your attempts to blame your subordinates are even more disgraceful." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt the weight of every gaze in the room, as though everyone was anticipating his downfall. He knew his excuses and justifications weren't enough, but he couldn't think of anything else to save himself. "Ms. Brooks, I take full responsibility," he finally said. "It was a lapse in judgment. I was under a lot of pressure, and that affected my behavior. If you could give me another chance, I promise I'll—" Eleanor raised her hand, silencing him once again. "A chance?" she asked, staring at him intently. "You had your chance yesterday, and you used it to humiliate someone you thought was beneath you. This wasn't a lapse in judgment, Mr. Reynolds. It was a choice. And now, your choices have consequences." Michael's stomach churned. Eleanor's words were final, and he knew there was no escaping them. The power he had clung to, the control he believed he had over the branch, was slipping away before his eyes. Eleanor turned to the board members. "We need to decide how to proceed," she said. "But let me be clear, this incident isn't just about one individual. It's a wake-up call for all of us. If we allow behavior like this to go unpunished, we betray the values we claim to uphold." The board members nodded, and the meeting continued. Michael, shrinking in his chair, knew his fate was sealed. Eleanor, her dignity intact, had demonstrated that true leadership is not about arrogance or power but about respect, empathy, and justice. The silence in the conference room was so profound it seemed to echo. Every eye was fixed on Eleanor Brooks, whose presence dominated the space with unquestionable authority. Michael Reynolds, by contrast, sat slumped in his chair, pale-faced and sweating. He knew that his carefully constructed career, built on a facade of efficiency and control, was on the verge of collapse. Eleanor stood, her gaze steady as she seemed to assess every person in the room, focusing especially on Michael. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she began to speak. "As you all know, this bank was founded on values that I consider non-negotiable: respect, inclusion, empathy, and excellence in service. These are not just slogans in our annual reports. They are the pillars that support everything we do," she said, her voice ringing clear. "Yesterday, those values were completely disregarded by leadership that should serve as an example." She paused, letting her words sink in. No one dared interrupt her. "Mr. Reynolds, your conduct was a betrayal of those principles. By humiliating a customer publicly, by uttering words filled with prejudice and disdain, you did more than harm one person. You compromised the integrity of this branch, this bank, and every employee who works here," Eleanor continued, addressing Michael directly. He attempted to speak, but the intensity of Eleanor's gaze silenced him. "I could handle this matter privately," she went on, now addressing the board members and staff gathered. "I could simply dismiss Mr. Reynolds and move on. But if I did that, it would perpetuate the idea that actions like his can be forgotten over time. This is a moment for learning, for all of us. This is a moment to show that actions have consequences." Turning her focus to the room as a whole, Eleanor expanded her message. "I want everyone to understand what's about to happen because this bank does not tolerate discrimination in any form. As of this moment, Mr. Michael Reynolds is officially terminated from his position as manager of this branch," she announced, her tone leaving no room for ambiguity. A murmur ran through the room. Some employees exchanged surprised glances, while others tried to hide subtle smiles. Eleanor's decision was expected, but the public manner in which it was delivered added a weight no one had anticipated. Michael stood up abruptly, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "Ms. Brooks, please. I made a mistake, but that doesn't justify," he began, but Eleanor cut him off with a calm yet authoritative gesture. "You had your chance to explain your actions, and all you did was blame others for your own failures," she said. "This bank has no place for leaders who fail to lead with integrity." Michael, still trying to argue, shook his head in denial, but Eleanor wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, "I want to inform you that the bank will be taking legal action against you for racial discrimination. The law is clear, and your behavior will not be ignored. This serves as a message that prejudice will not be allowed to thrive in our institution or anywhere else." Michael's face turned even paler. He knew his dismissal was already a devastating blow, but the prospect of being sued meant his career, and possibly his personal reputation, was in ruins. Eleanor then turned to the other board members and staff. This incident has made it clear that we need significant changes in this branch's management. Starting today, we will begin a complete restructuring, beginning with mandatory training for all employees on inclusion, diversity, and customer service practices. Additionally, a new manager will be appointed, someone who understands and exemplifies the values of this company, she announced. She looked at the staff present, her tone softening but remaining firm. I want you all to know that I'm not here to instill fear or distrust. I'm here to ensure that you have a healthy workplace environment and that every customer, regardless of their appearance, social status, or any other characteristic, is treated with the respect they deserve. The employees nodded silently, some visibly relieved. Many had felt the weight of Michael's oppressive leadership and now saw his departure as an opportunity for a fresh start. Eleanor turned back to Michael, whose gaze was fixed on the floor. Mr. Reynolds, I now ask that you leave this branch immediately. A security guard will escort you out. We will not allow any further embarrassment or arguments. 2 security guards stepped forward, positioning themselves beside Michael. He hesitated, appearing resistant to the command, but he knew he had no choice. The humiliation he had inflicted on Eleanor now fell upon him in an even harsher manner. He was escorted to the branch doors under the watchful eyes of every employee. As he walked, he could feel the stares piercing him, some disapproving, others relieved. The main floor, which he had often crossed with an air of superiority, now felt like a corridor of judgment. The walk seemed endless. When he finally reached the door, Eleanor, who had followed him to the main floor, made her final statement, this time for everyone to hear. Let this serve as a reminder that no one is above the values that define who we are, and that we are all responsible for ensuring our environment is inclusive, respectful, and dignified for everyone. Michael left without looking back, the security guards closing the agency doors behind him. The silence inside the building was broken by a collective sigh, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. With Michael gone, Eleanor turned to the employees and board members. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm confident we can turn this moment into something positive. Each of you is a vital part of this bank, and I hope we can rebuild the trust that has been shaken, together. The employees, still processing everything that had happened, began to applaud. The gesture was more than a sign of respect, it was a signal of hope. Eleanor's presence and decisive actions showed that real change was on the horizon. As she returned to the conference room to finalize the next steps with the board, Eleanor felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. She knew she had done what was necessary, but she also understood that her mission was just beginning. Transforming a culture was no small task, but she was determined to ensure that First Capital Bank became a place where everyone, customers and employees alike, felt valued. In the weeks that followed, the case involving Eleanor Brooks and Michael Reynolds became a landmark not only for First Capital Bank but also for the financial sector. Michael's public dismissal and Eleanor's firm stance against racial discrimination sparked intense debates on social media, in the press, and within corporate forums. Now, the woman who had faced prejudice and helped rebuild the bank was preparing to share her story with the world. Among the many interview requests Eleanor received, she carefully selected a program that represented the same values she sought to uphold: integrity, respect, and justice. The program would air live on one of the largest television networks, and the anticipation was enormous. Seated in the studio, Eleanor wore an elegant navy blue suit with a delicate brooch pinned to the lapel. Her posture exuded calm, but her eyes reflected determination. Across from her, journalist Clara Myers, known for her in-depth and empathetic interviews, began the conversation. Ms. Brooks, first of all, thank you for being here. I believe millions of people are eager to hear directly from you about the recent incident and, more importantly, about your inspiring journey. Let's start at the beginning. Who is Eleanor Brooks? Eleanor smiled softly, adjusting her glasses before responding. Thank you, Clara. Well, I'm a woman who learned at a very young age that life doesn't come with guarantees. I grew up in a small town in the southern United States, in a community where opportunities were scarce, especially for a young black girl. My father was a bricklayer, and my mother worked as a housekeeper. They always taught me that knowledge was something no one could take away from me. That belief guided me throughout my life. Eleanor recounted her difficult childhood, facing poverty and discrimination. She spoke of studying by candlelight when there was no electricity and how her love for math earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university. I was the first person in my family to attend college, she said, her voice filled with emotion. It was an enormous challenge, but also a blessing. I worked as a waitress, a librarian. I did whatever it took to support myself. Every obstacle made me stronger. Claire, visibly moved, asked, "And how did you get your start in the financial sector?" Eleanor explained how she began in entry-level positions at small banks, often facing resistance from colleagues who doubted her abilities. "Many times, I was the only black woman in the room," she shared. "It wasn't easy. There were comments, looks, and sometimes closed doors. But instead of letting it discourage me, I used it as motivation. Every challenge was an opportunity to prove that I belonged, that I had value, that I could contribute. Slowly, I carved out a space for myself." She went on to describe how, decades later, she founded the financial group that now controls First Capital Bank, always with the vision of creating an institution that prioritized inclusion and respect for all. When the conversation shifted to the incident with Michael Reynolds, Eleanor spoke about it with calm and honesty. "What happened at that branch was a reflection of a much larger problem," she said. "It wasn't just about an arrogant manager or a single moment of discrimination. It was a symptom of a culture that needs to change, not just in the bank, but in society as a whole. I knew I couldn't let it pass. Not for myself, but for everyone who has ever been treated as less than they deserve." Clara asked how Eleanor felt in the moment of humiliation. "It was painful, of course," Eleanor admitted. "But it was also a reminder of why I started all of this in the first place. I was there, in that branch, to ensure everyone is treated with dignity. And, ironically, I experienced exactly what I've always fought to eliminate. I decided to turn that pain into a lesson, not just for the bank, but for myself." Toward the end of the interview, Eleanor made an announcement that deeply moved the audience. "I want to take this opportunity to introduce a new program we are implementing at First Capital Bank," she began. "It's called Pathways to Respect, and it will be an ongoing commitment to inclusion, diversity, and equality across all our branches. It will include mandatory training for all employees, as well as partnerships with organizations that combat racial discrimination and promote equity." Eleanor paused, looking directly into the camera. "We're not just trying to correct the mistakes of the past. We're building a better future. And I want everyone to know that we are committed to this. This isn't just a promise, it's action." The interview was an instant success. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForEleanor gained renewed momentum, but this time accompanied by messages of hope and admiration. "Eleanor Brooks is the leader the world needs. What an inspiration. Turning pain into real change is something we should all strive for. This program is the legacy we need. Thank you, Eleanor, for your courage." Newspapers and TV channels also highlighted Eleanor's announcement, praising her leadership and vision. Within the bank itself, employees felt motivated and proud to be part of an institution taking concrete steps to improve its culture. As Eleanor returned home that evening, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't just because of the interview or the program she had announced, but because she felt she had honored the values her parents had instilled in her. She knew the fight for equality and respect was ongoing, but she also knew that small victories like this made a difference. Her legacy wasn't just in numbers or material achievements, but in the lives she had impacted and the change she had inspired. Sitting in her favorite chair, Eleanor looked out at the city lights through the window. The weight of the incident still lingered, but it felt smaller now, overshadowed by the strength of the transformation it had sparked. With a serene smile, she thought, "The work is never done, but every step is worth it." And so, Eleanor Brooks solidified her place not only as a leader in the financial sector but as a powerful voice for justice and dignity for all. The case of Eleanor Brooks and First Capital Bank reverberated far beyond the walls of the branch where it all began. The incident became a symbol of the fight against prejudice and discrimination, inspiring real change in the corporate world and serving as a warning to leaders who neglect the essential values of empathy and respect. At First Capital Bank, the implementation of the Pathways to Respect program became the top priority. Training sessions were conducted across all branches, featuring lectures by experts on diversity and inclusion. Employees were encouraged to share their experiences and participate in discussions, fostering a more collaborative and understanding workplace. The changes also included creating an anonymous channel for reporting discrimination and harassment, ensuring situations like Eleanor's would be addressed immediately and transparently. The bank also committed to hiring a more diverse workforce, including individuals from historically marginalized communities. The impact was evident. Customers who had previously felt overlooked began praising the service, and the bank's reputation was gradually restored. Shares that had dropped after the scandal started to recover, and the financial institution became an example of how crises could be turned into opportunities for growth. Eleanor's story gained recognition in documentaries, books, and even speeches at major conferences. Her message of resilience and transformation reached thousands, inspiring leaders across industries to rethink their practices and embrace inclusion as a fundamental pillar of their organizations. Eleanor, however, remained true to her nature. She declined grandiose titles or excessive honors. For her, what mattered most was the real impact of her actions. "It's not about me," she said during a speech to a group of young entrepreneurs. "It's about what all of us can do to create a fairer world." Success isn't measured by profits or awards but by the character we show in the decisions we make. Her speech was met with a standing ovation, reinforcing her role as a leader who didn't just talk about change, she lived it. While Eleanor became an icon, Michael Reynolds faced the consequences of his actions. After his public dismissal and the lawsuit for racial discrimination, he struggled to find another job in the financial sector. His reputation was ruined, and he came to symbolize the dangers of allowing prejudice and arrogance to infiltrate leadership. With no alternatives in the corporate world, Michael tried to rebuild his life in less competitive fields, but the shadow of the scandal followed him. Eventually, he accepted a modest job at a small company where he had time to reflect on his actions. "I never thought I'd lose everything over something I considered insignificant at the time," he admitted years later in an interview with a small local newspaper. "But I learned the hard way that our words and actions matter. I'm still working to become a better person." Although regretful, Michael knew he couldn't undo the harm he had caused to Eleanor or his own life. He continued to serve as an example of what happens when power is wielded improperly. The repercussions of the case reached other companies, prompting them to adopt preventative measures to avoid similar incidents. Global corporations announced new inclusion programs and revised their HR policies. Some organizations established internal councils dedicated to promoting diversity and monitoring discriminatory practices. The movement gained momentum as more business leaders recognized that inclusive practices were not just ethical but strategic. Companies that valued diversity reported increases in productivity, innovation, and customer satisfaction. Despite the recognition and a busy schedule, Eleanor always found time for herself. She spent her mornings tending to the small garden at her home and devoted her afternoons to responding to letters from young entrepreneurs seeking advice. To her, these interactions were more meaningful than any award or title. "My greatest reward is knowing that my story helped someone feel stronger, more capable," she told Margaret while reading a thank you letter from a young economics student. Margaret smiled. "You've changed more lives than you realize, Eleanor." "Including mine." Eleanor returned the smile, grateful to have transformed a moment of pain into something meaningful. In the years that followed, the impact of the case continued to spread. Programs like Pathways to Respect were replicated in other industries, and Eleanor's message became a staple in leadership and management curricula. Eleanor also helped establish a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting young people from underserved communities who aspired to enter the business world. The organization offered scholarships, mentorships, and internships, ensuring that more individuals had real opportunities to achieve their dreams. On the 5th anniversary of the incident that changed everything, Eleanor was invited to a special event at First Capital Bank. Employees, customers, and business leaders gathered to honor her legacy. During her speech, she left a message that would resonate for years to come. When we face injustices, we have two choices. We can let them define us, or we can use them as fuel to build something better. What happened to me was difficult, but it was also an opportunity. And I chose change. The audience responded with warm applause, reaffirming that Eleanor Brooks was not just a leader but an inspiration to all. Her name came to symbolize not only the fight against discrimination but also the ability to transform pain into progress and prejudice into lessons learned. Eleanor showed that true success doesn't lie in wealth or power but in the strength of character and the positive impact we leave on the world. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content. There are more amazing stories waiting for you. Click here and keep watching.